She told everyone she was basically single. I discovered this completely by accident when I came home early from a cabinet installation job in North Tucson because the client's granite countertops hadn't arrived yet, leaving me with an unexpected free afternoon that would change everything I thought I knew about my relationship. I'd been dating Melissa for 3 years, living together for the past 18 months in a decent rental house near the university, and I genuinely believed we were building something solid together, something that would eventually lead to marriage and the kind of life I'd always envisioned for myself. I'm a custom cabinet maker, 29 years old, and I take the same pride in crafting furniture that lasts generations as I put into building relationships with careful attention, quality materials, and long-term planning that creates something beautiful and enduring. I pulled into our gravel driveway around 2 in the afternoon, already mentally planning to use the extra time to work on the walnut jewelry box I was making for Melissa's upcoming 26th birthday, complete with felt-lined compartments and a hand-carved rose design on the lid that had taken me weeks to perfect. The Arizona heat was brutal even in October, so I was grateful to see that Melissa had left the windows open to catch the cross breeze, though I could hear voices drifting through the living room screen that indicated her weekly wine group was in full session. I recognized the familiar sounds of her usual crew, including Courtney, the sharp-tongued marketing manager who seemed to treat other people's relationships like her personal entertainment and had never particularly warmed up to me during the few times we'd been introduced at social gatherings. I grabbed my tool bag from the truck bed quietly, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like an increasingly animated discussion, but as I approached our weathered front door with its peeling blue paint, I caught fragments of conversation that made me stop dead in my tracks on the concrete walkway. Melissa's voice carried clearly through the screen, more animated and engaged than I'd heard her sound in months when she talked about anything involving our life together. She was describing in vivid detail how boring and predictable our relationship had become, how we devolved into being basically just roommates who occasionally had obligatory sex, and how she felt completely trapped in this suffocating domestic routine that was draining all the excitement and spontaneity from what should have been the best years of her 20s. I stood there in the shade of our desert willow tree, feeling like an intruder in my own life as she painted a picture of our relationship that was so foreign to my experience it might as well have been describing strangers. According to her version of events, I was someone who never wanted to go anywhere interesting, never surprised her with romantic gestures, and had basically given up trying to be the kind of man who could keep a woman like her interested and engaged. The other women were eating up every word, making sympathetic murmuring sounds and offering advice that ranged from couples counseling to outright encouragement to start exploring her options with other men who might appreciate what she had to offer. Courtney's voice cut through the supportive chatter with surgical precision, suggesting that Melissa should absolutely test the waters and see what else was available while keeping me as a reliable backup plan until she found someone who could actually make her feel alive again. The conversation continued for another agonizing 20 minutes while I remained frozen on my own front walkway, listening as Melissa described how she'd already started flirting with male coworkers and how incredibly liberating it felt to present herself as completely single and available when she went out with friends to bars and social events around town. She mentioned downloading multiple dating apps just to see what kind of interest she might generate, and laughed about how several attractive men had already asked for her number at various parties and gatherings where she deliberately introduced herself as unattached and looking to meet new people. I listened to 3 years of careful relationship building being systematically dissected and dismissed by women who knew nothing about the effort I'd put into making our life together work, while my girlfriend methodically erased my existence from her public narrative as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient roommate she'd eventually need to replace with someone more exciting. Instead of confronting Melissa immediately about what I'd overheard, I decided to take a more strategic approach and gather concrete evidence of exactly how far this deception had progressed before making any decisions about our future together. I quietly retreated to my workshop in the garage, where I spent the rest of the afternoon processing what I'd learned while researching apartment rentals in Scottsdale, a town about 30 minutes away where I could start fresh without constantly running into reminders of our shared life. Over the next several days, I began systematically documenting Melissa's behavior patterns, taking screenshots of her social media activity and noting the times she claimed to be working late or out with girlfriends, while simultaneously creating my own dating profile on the same apps I suspected she was using to explore her options. What I discovered through careful observation was even worse than I'd initially suspected, revealing a level of systematic deception that had apparently been going on for months without my knowledge. Her Instagram stories, which I'd rarely paid close attention to before, were filled with photos from bars and restaurants where she was clearly presenting herself as single and available, posing with groups of women but making sure to crop out any evidence of a boyfriend or committed relationship from her carefully curated online presence. I found screenshots on her phone of conversations with multiple men from dating apps, some of which had progressed to exchanging phone numbers and making plans for coffee dates or dinner meetings that she disguised as work obligations or friend hangouts when explaining her schedule to me. The most damning evidence came from her work Instagram account, where she'd posted photos from the office happy hours and company events I'd never been invited to, with captions about being young, single, and loving the freedom to meet new people and explore new opportunities in the city. I began the practical process of preparing for a complete departure, transferring my most valuable tools and personal belongings to my workshop space gradually, a few boxes at a time, so that when the time came to leave I could execute my plan quickly and efficiently without having to negotiate for my possessions or endure drawn-out confrontations about our shared household items. I researched the rental market thoroughly, contacted several potential landlords in Scottsdale, and even put a deposit down on a small house with a detached workshop space that would be perfect for expanding my custom furniture business without the distraction of relationship drama affecting my professional reputation. Meanwhile, Melissa continued her double life with increasing boldness, staying out later on weeknights and spending entire weekends at social events where she was apparently networking with potential romantic prospects while maintaining the fiction at home that she was simply enjoying girl time and expanding her professional connections. She started taking more phone calls in private, claiming they were work-related, and began spending significantly more time getting ready for these mysterious social obligations, investing in new clothes and makeup that she'd never bothered with during our quiet evenings at home. The most telling change was in her attitude toward our relationship itself, as she became increasingly critical of my work schedule, my social circle, and my general approach to life, as if she were building a case for why our relationship was fundamentally incompatible rather than working to address any legitimate concerns through honest communication. She complained that I was too focused on my business, too content with simple pleasures, and not ambitious enough for someone with her social aspirations, even though these were exactly the qualities that had attracted her to me initially when we'd met at a friend's barbecue 3 years earlier. The perfect opportunity for exposing Melissa's deception presented itself when I learned through careful observation of her work calendar that she was planning to bring a date to her company's annual summer barbecue, a major social event where many of our mutual friends and acquaintances would be present as guests or employees. She'd been dropping hints about this event for weeks, mentioning how excited she was about the casual outdoor setting and how it would be a great chance to introduce her coworkers to some of the interesting new people she'd been meeting around town, all while assuming I'd be working that Saturday on a kitchen remodel project that was scheduled to run through the weekend. What she didn't know was that I'd deliberately arranged to have that particular job completed ahead of schedule, coordinating with my client to finish the installation on Friday evening so I could have Saturday completely free for what I was already planning as the grand finale of our relationship. I reached out to my buddy Trevor, who worked in Melissa's marketing department and had always been straight with me about office dynamics, explaining the basic situation and asking if he'd be willing to help me make a surprise appearance at the company barbecue that would maximize the impact of whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Trevor was initially shocked by what I told him about Melissa's double life, since he'd always believed we were in a committed relationship based on how she'd presented things during her first year at the company, but he quickly agreed to coordinate with me once he realized the extent of her systematic deception and how it reflected on her character and professional integrity. I spent the week preparing for this public revelation by carefully crafting a social media post that would expose the truth about our relationship status without coming across as vindictive or unstable, focusing on factual information about our living situation and shared financial obligations that would be impossible for her to dispute or spin as a misunderstanding. The post included screenshots of our lease agreement, recent photos of us together at home, and a timeline of our relationship that clearly established we were currently living as a committed couple, regardless of whatever stories she'd been telling her coworkers and dating prospects. I also prepared a backup plan involving text message evidence and social media documentation that would support my version of events if she tried to claim we'd broken up weeks ago or that our relationship had been over for months, ensuring I had enough concrete proof to counter whatever narrative she might improvise in the moment. Trevor provided crucial intelligence about the barbecue logistics, including the timing of activities, the layout of the venue, and the likely attendance list, helping me plan an entrance that would create maximum visibility without appearing staged or overly dramatic. The event was being held at a popular riverside park in central Tucson, with most of the marketing team and their guests expected to attend along with several other departments and their families, creating the perfect audience for what was about to unfold. I spent Friday evening making final preparations, ensuring my truck was clean and presentable, selecting clothing that would make me look confident and put together, and mentally rehearsing how I wanted to handle the inevitable confrontation with dignity and composure rather than anger or emotional outbursts. The goal was to expose her deception clearly and definitively while maintaining the moral high ground and leaving her to deal with the social and professional consequences of her own choices, rather than giving her any ammunition to paint me as the unstable or unreasonable party in this situation. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect weather for an outdoor barbecue, and I drove toward the Riverside Park with a strange sense of calm purpose, knowing that within the next hour everything would be out in the open and I'd finally be free to move on with my life. Trevor had texted me updates throughout the morning, confirming that Melissa had indeed arrived with her date, a guy named Brad who worked as a marketing manager for a competing firm and apparently had no idea he was being used as a prop in her elaborate deception about being single and available. I parked my truck at the far end of the lot and walked toward the pavilion area where the company had set up tables and grilling stations, immediately spotting Melissa near the beverage station wearing a sundress I'd never seen before and laughing in that artificially animated way she used when she was trying to impress someone new. Brad appeared to be in his early 30s, reasonably attractive in a generic business professional way, and was clearly enjoying what he believed was his first public appearance with his new girlfriend, completely unaware that he was about to become collateral damage in the exposure of her systematic dishonesty. I approached their group casually, stopping to greet a few of Melissa's co-workers I recognized from previous social gatherings, making small talk about work and the beautiful weather while positioning myself within earshot of her conversations with Brad and the other attendees. The irony was almost amusing as I listened to her introduce Brad to various colleagues as someone she'd recently started seeing, describing how refreshing it was to find a man who understood her career ambitions and social needs, all while standing less than 20 feet away from the boyfriend she'd been systematically erasing from her public narrative for months. When the moment felt right, I walked directly over to their conversation circle and inserted myself into the group with a friendly smile, extending my hand to Brad and introducing myself in a clear, carrying voice that immediately captured the attention of everyone within a 15-foot radius. The look of absolute shock and panic that crossed Melissa's face was worth every moment of planning and preparation, as she realized her carefully constructed world of deception was about to collapse in the most public and humiliating way possible. I calmly explained to Brad that I was Melissa's live-in boyfriend of 3 years, mentioning specific details about our shared living situation and recent conversations that made it impossible for her to claim this was some kind of misunderstanding or coincidence. Brad's confusion quickly turned to anger as he realized he'd been deceived and manipulated, while Melissa frantically tried to interrupt and control the narrative by claiming we'd broken up weeks ago and I was just having trouble accepting the reality of our situation. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed Brad and several gathered coworkers the text messages Melissa had sent me just that morning, asking me to pick up groceries on my way home from work and reminding me about dinner plans with her parents the following weekend. The evidence was undeniable, and the crowd of onlookers grew larger as word spread through the party about the dramatic confrontation unfolding near the beverage station, with several people discreetly filming what was rapidly becoming viral content within their social circle. Brad stormed off in disgust, calling Melissa a liar and a manipulator while several of her female coworkers stared in shocked silence, clearly processing the implications of what they'd just witnessed and how it reflected on everything they thought they knew about her character. I announced to the assembled group that I was moving out immediately and wished everyone a pleasant afternoon, then walked back to my truck with complete composure while Melissa called after me desperately, trying to salvage some dignity from a situation that had spiraled completely beyond her control. By the time I reached my vehicle, my phone was already buzzing with notifications from the social media post I'd scheduled to go live during the confrontation, and I could see several people at the party checking their phones and sharing what they'd just witnessed with friends who hadn't been there to see it firsthand. The execution of my departure plan went smoother than I could have imagined, thanks to the weeks of careful preparation I'd invested in organizing my belongings and securing alternative living arrangements in Scottsdale. I drove straight from the barbecue to my new house, where I spent the remainder of Saturday afternoon setting up my essential furniture and workshop equipment, feeling a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in months as I arranged my tools and personal possessions in spaces that were entirely my own. Trevor called that evening to give me an update on the fallout from the afternoon's confrontation, reporting that Melissa had left the party in tears within 30 minutes of my departure, and that several of her co-workers had spent the rest of the event discussing what they'd witnessed and sharing stories about inconsistencies they'd noticed in her previous claims about being single. The social media post I'd published during the barbecue had already gained significant traction within our interconnected social circles, with dozens of comments from mutual friends expressing shock and support, while several people shared screenshots of dating app conversations they'd had with Melissa over the past few months, providing additional evidence of her systematic deception. By Sunday morning, I returned to our shared house with Trevor and 2 other friends to collect the remaining items I'd cataloged during my preparation phase, timing the visit for when Melissa would be at her weekly yoga class to avoid any dramatic confrontations or attempts to negotiate my decision to leave. The entire process took less than 3 hours, and I left behind only the furniture we'd purchased together and a forwarding address for any official mail that might arrive in my name, along with my half of the utilities and rent for the remainder of the month to fulfill my legal obligations under our lease agreement. I spent the following week blocking Melissa on all social media platforms and changing my phone number, creating a clean separation that would prevent her from attempting to manipulate me back into her chaotic orbit through emotional appeals or promises to change her behavior. The response from our mutual friend network was overwhelmingly supportive, with many people reaching out to express their admiration for how I'd handled the situation with dignity and strategic precision, while others shared their own stories about red flags they'd noticed in Melissa's behavior during social gatherings where she'd presented herself as single despite our established relationship. Within days, several of her dating app matches had commented publicly on social media posts about the barbecue incident, revealing detailed conversations where she described herself as recently out of a long-term relationship and eager to explore her options with new people, providing a comprehensive picture of how extensively she'd been deceiving potential romantic partners about her availability. The most satisfying aspect of the entire situation was discovering that my careful documentation and strategic approach had made it impossible for Melissa to spin the narrative in her favor or paint me as the unstable party in our breakup, since the evidence of her deception was so overwhelming that even her closest female friends had difficulty defending her actions. Trevor reported that she'd been noticeably absent from work for several days following the barbecue, and when she did return, her interactions with colleagues were awkward and strained, with many people treating her differently after witnessing her capacity for systematic dishonesty in her personal relationships. The consequences of Melissa's public humiliation at the company barbecue extended far beyond what either of us had anticipated, creating a ripple effect that damaged both her professional reputation and her personal relationships within our interconnected social circles throughout Tucson. Trevor kept me updated on the workplace fallout, reporting that Melissa had been called into her supervisor's office the Monday following the barbecue to discuss the disruption she'd caused at a company event, with several colleagues expressing concern about her judgment and professionalism after witnessing her deceptive behavior regarding her relationship status. Her immediate supervisor was particularly concerned about the potential liability issues of having an employee who demonstrated such poor decision-making and dishonesty in her personal life, especially since the marketing department frequently worked with external clients who valued trust and integrity in their business relationships. Within 2 weeks of the barbecue incident, Melissa had been placed on a performance improvement plan that effectively eliminated her chances for the promotion she'd been pursuing, while several key projects were reassigned to other team members who hadn't become the subject of workplace gossip and speculation. Her attempts to explain the situation as a misunderstanding or personal matter that shouldn't affect her professional standing fell on deaf ears, since multiple witnesses had seen her systematically deceive both her date and her coworkers about her availability and relationship status. The social consequences proved even more devastating than the professional ones, as our mutual friends began distancing themselves from Melissa after learning about the extent of her deception and manipulation. Courtney, the wine group leader who had encouraged Melissa's duplicitous behavior, found herself facing criticism from other group members who felt uncomfortable with the toxic dynamic they'd unknowingly supported, leading to the dissolution of the weekly gatherings that had been Melissa's primary social outlet. Several women who had been part of her social circle reached out to me privately to apologize for not recognizing the signs of her dishonesty sooner, sharing stories about conversations where Melissa had badmouthed our relationship while simultaneously posting happy couple photos on social media to maintain the illusion of contentment. The dating app evidence that had emerged during the barbecue aftermath created additional problems for Melissa, as screenshots of her conversations with multiple men circulated throughout our social network, revealing the calculated way she'd been presenting herself as recently single and available while living with me as a committed partner. Several of the men she'd been messaging publicly commented on social media posts about the incident, expressing their disgust at being manipulated and used as pawns in her elaborate deception, while warning others in the local dating scene to be cautious about her reliability and honesty. The most damaging aspect of the entire situation was Melissa's complete inability to take responsibility for her actions or acknowledge the hurt she'd caused, instead choosing to portray herself as the victim of my supposed controlling behavior and jealousy. Her attempts to reframe the narrative only succeeded in further alienating the people who might have been willing to forgive her mistakes if she'd shown genuine remorse and accountability for her choices. 6 months after the barbecue confrontation, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I first overheard that devastating conversation through our living room window, and I found myself genuinely grateful that Melissa's deception had been exposed before I'd wasted any more years building a future with someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient placeholder. My custom furniture business had flourished beyond my wildest expectations, thanks partly to the increased social media visibility that resulted from the dramatic breakup story, but more importantly because I could now focus entirely on my craft without the constant distraction of relationship drama and emotional manipulation. I'd connected with Sarah Chen, a local art teacher who'd reached out after seeing photos of my woodworking projects online, and we developed a genuine friendship that gradually evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than anything I'd experienced with Melissa. Sarah appreciated the time and care I put into creating beautiful, functional pieces, and she understood that my attention to detail and methodical approach weren't signs of being boring or predictable, but rather evidence of someone who took pride in doing things correctly and building something that would last. Our relationship developed naturally without games or deception, built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than the superficial attraction and social climbing that had characterized my time with Melissa. We spent evenings working on creative projects together, with Sarah painting while I crafted custom frames for her artwork, creating a collaborative partnership that felt both productive and deeply satisfying. The contrast between Sarah's genuine appreciation for my qualities and Melissa's constant criticism and dissatisfaction made me realize how much damage my previous relationship had done to my self-confidence and sense of worth. Through mutual friends, I learned that Melissa's life had continued its downward spiral since the barbecue incident, with her professional reputation never fully recovering from the workplace drama and her personal relationships remaining unstable due to the trust issues she'd created within our social circles. She'd been forced to move back in with her parents after struggling to afford rent on her reduced income, and several people reported seeing her working at a retail job in one of the local malls, a significant step down from her previous marketing position. Her attempts to rebuild her social life had been unsuccessful, as word of her deceptive behavior had spread throughout the interconnected network of young professionals in Tucson, making it difficult for her to establish new friendships or romantic relationships with people who hadn't already heard about her reputation for dishonesty and manipulation. The story of our breakup had become something of a cautionary tale within our social circle, with several couples using it as an example of how important honesty and communication are in maintaining healthy relationships, while others shared it as a reminder that actions have consequences and that treating people poorly will eventually catch up with you. Sarah and I had recently started discussing the possibility of moving in together, not because of financial necessity or social pressure, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company and wanted to build something meaningful together. The difference in how we approached this decision, with open communication and mutual enthusiasm, highlighted just how toxic and one-sided my previous relationship had really been, and I felt incredibly fortunate to have escaped before making any permanent commitments to someone who had never truly valued or respected